Welcome to Mardi Gras Central, the birthplace of jazz and the greatest breakfast pastry ever, the beignet. Today we're talking about New Orleans, so don't go away. Here's a 30-second teaser of the episode.
I think a lot of people think that Mardi Gras is just one day, but it's actually an entire season. And the city really is alive and vibrant and bustling for that entire season. New Orleans, it's known for being haunted. There are just so many stories grounded in reality. I basically do not necessarily recommend folks eat in the French Quarter. I would recommend they go to the Warehouse District because the food there is just all amazing. I think there is a particular etiquette that applies to a lot of the southern US that is a little different from what I grew up with in the northeast part of the country.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Travel Lemming podcast, where we discuss top travel destinations so you can get the local scoop on the best of these places around the world. I'm your host, Betty Hurd. I'm a senior travel writer and podcaster here at Travel Lemming. I also fly full-time as a Los Angeles-based flight attendant. I'm joined by our Louisiana local, who's an amazing freelance writer for Travel Lemming with tons of fantastic content on the website. Before moving to Louisiana, she traveled the world as a civilian scientist on Navy ships. So she has seen a lot of places and done a lot of exciting things before settling down near one of the most vibrant cities in the US. Before I introduce her, hit pause, go like and subscribe to our channel. Give us a 5-star rating while you're at it. We love getting your feedback and really appreciate your support for the show. Now, welcome to the show, our New Orleans expert, Meg O'Connor.
Hi, Betty. Thanks so much for having me. This is my first time on a podcast, so I'm super excited to be here, and I love talking about New Orleans and Louisiana in general. So I'm Meg O'Connor, and I grew up in Connecticut, so I am not a native of New Orleans, but I moved down here over 10 years ago because in my non-writing job, I am a data science and coastal scientist, and I fell in love. This is sort of strange, but I scientifically really love how mud moves down rivers and forms land at the bottom of the rivers in deltas. And there's one big delta in this country, and it's down here in Louisiana and right by New Orleans. So I moved down here about 10 years ago to go to LSU and study delta sedimentology, which is just big muddy river deposits. And I have a passion for not only the culture and the music and the people here, and that was a big part of why I stayed, but it's also really important to me to study this issue of land loss in Louisiana and try to protect this region that's just so culturally important to the entire country, in my opinion. So my interest is really multifaceted, and I love everything about this area.
That is so cool, and I don't think I know anybody in your field of work in my whole life. I've never heard anyone say that they fell in love with mud deposits. So I love that, and that's so cool that you're doing something that you're passionate about and you're living right where it all is.
Thank you. It's been really rewarding, and a lot of the work actually allows me to go out on things like airboats in the marsh. So within about a week of moving down here, I was stuck on an airboat and brought out basically to where the road ends and it turns into water. And we went out in the swamp, and there were just alligators everywhere swimming around our airboat. And I was there to collect mud samples basically in big waders and avoiding alligators. So it was really a harsh introduction to the place.
My God, yeah, what a way to start your time in Louisiana. That is very, very cool, though, and thank you for sharing that. Meg has tons of guides on Louisiana, as well as some other big destinations like the Netherlands on Travel Lemming. So make sure to follow up this episode by giving those a read on our website, travellemming.com. So Meg, although you weren't born and raised in New Orleans, you're our expert today for a reason, and you just kind of touched on this, but give us some background on your experience and time in New Orleans.
Sure. So I've always been a little obsessed with New Orleans, as was my family, sort of inexplicably. Like I remember my father playing Cajun music in our household growing up, even though I have truly no explanation for that because we are not Cajun. We're Irish and we were in Connecticut. But I really sort of grew up with this almost sense of like mythos of Louisiana and New Orleans. And so I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of my scientific love of deltas and mud and rivers, but a lot of concepts in geology operate on this extremely long time scale. Think about dinosaur fossils. For instance, you're looking at things that are very long gone. And so when I was studying geology in Massachusetts, And I started really learning about the land loss problems down here in Louisiana and how quickly the land is disappearing. People who were alive growing up here 40 years ago can point out a spot of water and say that used to be marsh. I remember standing there, it used to be land. And that idea that this place that means so much culturally to the country was also so endangered. And then with also this sense of sort of like mystery and mythos to me about what New Orleans was, and just growing up with the music, knowing a lot about the food. I studied French in school growing up. It all just came together and I had this real pull to move down here. And so, like I said, I went to LSU in Baton Rouge, but then when I started working for the Navy, I moved to the eastern side of the state, right outside New Orleans. And I now live for about 8 years, I've lived in a suburb outside New Orleans. But I have an extreme pull to the city. So I spend as much time there as I can. And I'm a real adventurer by spirit. And I try to just throw myself into any environment I'm in. So since moving down here, I basically just tried to say yes to everything I can, whether it's a crawfish boil, whether it's going out on the airboat with the alligators, whether it's, a new restaurant that just opened up in New Orleans. I always try to say yes, and I always try to do it. And so I hope that I'm able to provide a perspective on what both visitors and folks who have lived here for a long time, but maybe are trying to get out of their houses a little bit more, things that they can, just get brave and try and see how they like it.
Well, I love that yes mentality, especially when you move somewhere new. And it sounds like you've been upkeeping that for the past 10 years. And it really sounds like you were meant to be in Louisiana from everything that you just told me. And it's so fascinating how you were drawn to it. And I feel like when you feel that draw, you have to follow it. So I'm so glad you are in this place that you love and that you get to share it with us today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ben.
So I want to start with a very broad question, which is, what are the best things to do in New Orleans?
There are so many amazing things to do in New Orleans that this is a hard question to answer in some ways because it really depends on who you are and what you like. There are things for everyone. So I'll start with sort of the obvious where people's brains go when they think of New Orleans, I think, which is the French Quarter and in particular, Bourbon Street. So Bourbon Street, a lot of people know, is our famous thoroughfare that cuts straight down the French Quarter, which is the oldest part of the city and is that really sort of iconic. If you think The Princess and the Frog or just sort of any postcard of New Orleans, that's going to be the French Quarter. And Bourbon Street is our big bar party street that cuts it through the French Quarter. And I think a lot of people have partying on Bourbon Street as part of their bucket list in life. And I think if that's what you're about, that's absolutely something you should do when you're in town, because it is sort of a once in a lifetime experience to be on that street at night and walk down it with a beer in your hand, because you can walk down the street with beverages here. But it's also important to keep in mind that Bourbon Street is really it's known for its debauchery for a reason. And it's not a particularly family friendly environment, especially at night. And it really is a party scene. So if that's what you're looking for, I think it's great to experience that and have fun there. There are a few establishments on Bourbon Street that I think are a little bit more, maybe will appeal to a broader group of people. So if you find yourself on Bourbon Street and you're looking for something maybe a little chiller to do, I really love Pat O'Brien's bar, which is just off Bourbon on a side street. And it's a bar that's famous for its dueling piano contests. So they have a little piano lounge and they have this big open air courtyard. And I believe that they are famous as the home of the Hurricane, which is one of our famous cocktails here in New Orleans.
I've been to New Orleans just a handful of times, and every time everyone's drinking Hurricanes and Sazeracs.
Yep. Those are our two, I would say, biggest cocktails. And mint juleps are a pretty good one down here, too. They're more, not super New Orleans specific, but very Southern.
Very cool.
And then Jean Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop is also a bar on Bourbon that is a little off the beaten path. And it's it might be the oldest building in America that a bar is currently operating in. I think it's something like that. It's very, very old. And its claim to fame is that it was supposedly associated with the famous pirate Jean Lafitte, who maybe I'm sort of selling myself out here by having a favorite pirate, but he's my favorite pirate. I bet he's a lot of people's favorite pirates. And he has this blacksmith shop that was in his family, and it's this very old building, supposedly haunted, really kind of like creepy and peculiar. And so that's another kind of like stranger thing to do on Bourbon Street.
Why is he your favorite pirate?
This is okay. It's just going to get more and more embarrassing. I was into like the American Girl dolls as a kid, and they used to have these books. And there was one book where it was a historical book where this little girl went to New Orleans and had this like scary run in with Jean Lafitte the pirate. But in the book, he was actually this like gentleman and a scholar. Like, I'm not
super accurate.
Right, I'm not sure that checks out with what I know about him in real life, but that made me feel like the gentleman Jean Lafitte would have been my friend if I had been a little girl. And
that's so funny. I love that. Oh, thank you for sharing that.
So in terms of other things to do in New Orleans outside of partying, the French Quarter is really great during the day as well. And it's much more family friendly during the day. There are lots of museums, some really strange museums. The Pharmacy Museum is a bit odd. There's Voodoo Museum. And just walking around and seeing the sights in the French Quarter is really pretty great. There's a famous cathedral, St. Louis Cathedral, is really old and striking. And that's right there by Jackson Square, which is right by the Mississippi River and the levee. And the Steamboat Natchez, which is one of our main attractions, is also right there on the river. So if you can make your way to Jackson Square and sort of that area right there, it's very walkable and there's tons to see. And it will also situate you perfectly to hit up Café du Monde, which is where you can get beignets, the best beignets in the city.
So good. My God. I cannot tell you how many times as a kid we'd go to the one special store in Tucson where I'm from, and we would get the Café du Monde beignet mix. And so I grew up making this at home. And when my family and I went to New Orleans to start a cruise when I was 13, and it was like the greatest thing of all of our lives, like my brothers and me, we waited in line for so long to get into the original Café du Monde, but it was so worth it. My God. Beignets, for anyone who hasn't had one, can you describe that a little bit? I know we'll talk about food later too, but since we're on it, tell them about
yeah, as a little teaser. Well, first of all, it's really cool that they sold that Café du Monde beignet mix in Tucson. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The one store, yes.
Beignets are basically little square pastries. They're like fried dough and they're covered in powdered sugar. They're super messy to eat, but super delicious. And it's a very common thing that like if you accidentally exhale wrong, so you're bringing a beignet to your face, you can like slightly asphyxiate on the powdered sugar and it tends to go like explode everywhere. So
true.
Eating beignets is always a pretty memorable experience. And they're frequently served with either café au lait, which is just, the French word for coffee with milk. And it tends to have chicory in it down here, which is a slightly bitter root, or hot chocolate, especially for kids.
Yeah, it's such a good combination. Just the pastry with the powdered sugar with like a black coffee or the café au lait. Oh, so good.
But you'll have
so
it
good.
on you for the rest of the day, so be prepared.
Oh,
you
everywhere.
will wear the powdered
like
sugar.
You said, every time I do that thing where I like inhale and I just breathe in like all this powdered sugar, it's so awful. But
they're sort of worth dying
aside
for.
From that, they are absolutely worth dying for.
So wrapping up the things to do in the French Quarter, just a few more options. The ghost tours in New Orleans, because it's a pretty spooky city. It's known for being haunted. It's very old. It sort of has the old European feel architecture. So it's got that vibe about it. And because of some of the, particularly truly horrible things, unfortunately, that have happened in the city, there are just so many stories grounded in reality. And I think these ghost tours, if you're interested in the macabre, they're definitely entertaining. It's a way to get out and move your body and have a guide in the French Quarter at night, and adds to the safety of the experience. But it's also just a great way to learn more about the history and the culture of the region, because so many of these stories are truly based in actual historical things that happen down here. So I think that's a great option, especially for groups of adults who are looking for something to do when the sun goes down that might not just be limited to Bourbon Street. And then outside of that, there are several other areas of the city that have some really great things to do that are a bit off the sort of that beaten track of the French Quarter area. So City Park is one of our biggest parks, and it's really beautiful. It's got an amazing Louisiana-themed putt-putt course that I really love, and definitely families have kids, that's a really great option. They've got like swan boats. You can paddle through the river there. And one of the coolest things, there's the New Orleans Museum of Art on the grounds of City Park. And they have a sculpture garden that's free and open to the public, and you can walk through it. And there are bridges and things that go over the water bodies of City Park. And if you choose to rent a kayak or a paddleboard or a swan boat or whatever and explore those waterways, you can actually paddle right under the bridges and things of the sculpture garden. And you'll be right up in with the sculptures, which I think is really cool and really special. So,
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
City Park has a lot of things to do, especially for families.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. Especially because I think when a lot of people think of New Orleans, like you said, a lot of people want to come just for the partying, but it's not just for the young 20-something party goers. It's also for families. There's much more to it than, crazy bars in the French Quarter.
Exactly. And City Park especially really comes alive during the winter holidays. They put up light shows. They have a little train that runs through City Park and it goes through all the lights. And it's a really special attraction in the wintertime.
Very cool.
So finally, one of my favorite things to do in the city, and I'm a little biased because I secretly just want to be an amateur sleuth as my full-time job, but you can't really just opt into amateur sleuthing. The closest you can get from what I've found is escape rooms. And so I've done escape rooms all over the country because they're kind of my thing. And all of my favorites are in New Orleans. And I don't think it's just because I live here. I think the New Orleans escape rooms are truly incredible. There are multiple companies that really just blow it out of the park that are locally owned. And so there are escape rooms you can do here that are not franchises. You can't do them anywhere else in the country. And again, because it's such an aesthetically rich place and so culturally rich, a lot of these escape rooms are based on Louisiana lore and Louisiana aesthetics, culture. So one of my favorites was a haunted swamp room based on a story of a lady that people thought was a witch who lived out on this shack on a lake. And she used to always say, when I die, I'm bringing you all with me. And the people in her town were like, oh, okay, that's a little bit of a weird thing to keep saying. And then she died, and a hurricane apparently wiped out the town almost completely the next day. So she's kind of a local legend.
Wow.
And I did an escape room
so
based on her story. And so you had to try to stop the hurricane from wiping the town out before your timer ran out. And
that's so cool.
There's another escape room that's actually in an antique or like historical building. And they inherited basically this estate. And they used real props and real artifacts from this old mansion that are actually authentic and have built their escape rooms around this actual house and its stories, which I also think is really cool.
That is awesome. Yeah, I've never actually done an escape room in my entire life, and you're making me want to go there just to do that one that you mentioned. It sounds so cool. And I love when like a commonplace thing, which escape rooms are all over the place, when they actually incorporate the local lore and culture and make it their own. That's very interesting. I love that.
I agree.
What are some other things to do in New Orleans?
Well, it depends on the time of year you're here, but the other low-hanging fruit that I think is on many people's bucket list is Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is a great time to come to New Orleans. And I think a lot of people think that Mardi Gras is just one day, Fat Tuesday, but it's actually an entire season. And the city really is alive and vibrant and bustling for that entire season. So it kicks off on the Annunciation, which is January 6th, I believe. Every year it starts on the same day. And the ending of Mardi Gras sort of scales based on when Easter is, because Fat Tuesday is always the day before Lent begins in the Catholic tradition. So some years Mardi Gras season is longer, some years it's shorter, but there are parades throughout that entire season, usually January, February, part of March. And people think of parades as just, I think, tourists in the French Quarter, earning their beads or what have you. But it's not actually really this debaucherous holiday at all in terms of what locals value in Mardi Gras, I think. they're very family friendly oriented parades, most of them. And there are different parade routes. So a lot of our parades go through Uptown New Orleans and they don't even go downtown into the French Quarter. And many of those are some of our biggest, most amazing parades. And they're really sort of these incredible artistic feats. Like the floats themselves are just giant works of art. If you go to one of the night parades and the floats are all lit up, it's hard to even describe how gorgeous these parades are. And in terms of, throwing beads and things like that, yeah, there are a lot of plastic beads that get thrown in Mardi Gras. But I think another thing people might not know is that, especially these big parades that the locals are going to, each parade is operated by something called a crew, which is basically like a club, like a social club. And so each parade, like Muses, is operated by the crew of Muses, or Orpheus is operated by the crew of Orpheus. So each crew often has like their own special throw, which is the coveted throw. And so, for instance, one of my favorite parades is called Muses. It's an all-female crew in the city, and that has a cool history in itself. And they always have their parade the Thursday before Mardi Gras. So we even have parades during the work week, especially right leading up to Mardi Gras Day. And Muses, this all-female crew, has a lot of floats based off of Greek mythology, and their big coveted throw are these handmade high heel shoes that the women in the crew spend like the whole year making. And there's a limited number, so you're just really, really hoping you might get a Muse's shoe. And if you don't mind me showing you, Betty, I don't mean to,
Well, she's got a prop.
this is my Muse's shoe. As you can see,
Oh my gosh.
it's
Looks like a peacock.
yeah, blue and sparkly with these feathers here. Someone worked really hard on it. Unfortunately, the M has broken off, so it just says uses now. But I got a Muse's shoe. It's one of my proudest accomplishments. And
oh my gosh, understandably so. That's so cool that you got one when they're so limited.
a little less fancy, but definitely I'm equally proud of my Orpheus chicken hat. And it's the wings flap.
That's incredible.
Everyone was jealous. So,
oh my God, I'm jealous.
In other words, there's a lot more to Mardi Gras than just catching plastic beads in the French Quarter. And I highly recommend that visitors come maybe in the mid part of Mardi Gras, where they can go to some real authentic parades. Mardi Gras Day itself, actually, locals will tell you that it's pretty boring. There's not that much that happens on actual Mardi Gras Day because everyone is exhausted by Mardi Gras Day. So I will give a shout out to one really special parade on Mardi Gras Day called Zulu. And it is run by the crew of Zulu, which is the largest predominantly African-American crew in the city. And they have a really long history of just sort of accepting everyone into their crew. There's some, definitely divisive history amongst Mardi Gras crews and things like that. And Zulu has always stood by their set of values. And I really appreciate that about Zulu. They're a very big part of this city's culture and history. And their coveted throw is a special decorated coconut. But the caveat with Zulu is that their parade rolls at like 7 a.m. on Mardi Gras Day. And so
oh boy,
that's sort of like, if you are visiting for Mardi Gras, I would recommend trying to get yourself up for Zulu and make that your big goal for the day is Zulu, because that's really something special and authentic to see in the city.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that about Mardi Gras, because like you said, I think the way Mardi Gras is depicted for people who are not from New Orleans is that it's just this massive party that's wilder than anything else in the US. Like, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people talk about how like the women are topless hanging out the windows and, like just very not PG. So you can't bring kids or anything like that. And you're telling me about all these awesome other parades that are so family friendly and so wonderful for everybody. And which, not to knock the people who want to go to the crazy parts of town, for sure. I mean, I think it'd be so much fun to do that one day and see such an insane party go down. But it's nice that there's some wholesome stuff to do too.
Exactly. And I've never actually done like that sort of stereotypical crazy Mardi Gras French Quarter experience because, again, that's
Hmm.
not what locals think of as the real Mardi Gras, I think, in so many ways. And I'll just add, if people do come for Mardi Gras, it's incredibly hard to drive around the city. And so figuring out where to stay for Mardi Gras is you would have to plan way in advance. It would be
Oh,
really
yeah.
wise to look up the parade routes, which are available online. And again, the Uptown parades and the Midtown parades, neither of which are downtown, obviously, are all amazing parades. And so finding a hotel really, really early that's walking distance from those parade routes is the best thing you could possibly do to set yourself up for like a really incredible Mardi Gras day.
Very good to know. Yeah, I was one time I had a layover for work in downtown New Orleans during the Super Bowl, which I know is not the same as Mardi Gras, but I feel like kind of the same kind of vibe in
Mhm.
terms of how many people were there. My God, it took us almost 2 hours to get from downtown to the airport to get to work. The flight was delayed because we weren't there. And I've never been in traffic like that. And it was just like standstill, locked in the city, like total gridlock. So I
Mhm.
remember thinking, this is the Super Bowl, which I know is a massive event, but I'm sure for Mardi Gras, with just everyone all over the country coming there for that, it's got to be insane.
Exactly. And figuring out where to park is quite an ordeal. And bathrooms are not very accessible during Mardi Gras. It's sort of like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing we all talk
Really?
about. It's stressful every year. And so if you did have a hotel within walking distance, you'd find out quickly it's a real blessing.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's worth it to splurge on something that you can just walk to and from. Even though it's for sure going to be more expensive, probably one of the few times I'd say just spend the money on it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, you've gone through all of these awesome things to do in the city. For you personally, what are your top 5 attractions in New Orleans?
Ooh, okay.
I know it's a hard
It
question
is a hard
to
question.
to force you to narrow it down, but
I am going to go with the World War II Museum. If you're into history at all or military history, it is a world renowned museum. You really need all day to go through this museum. It's in the Warehouse District of New Orleans and it is massive. It's a little, for obvious reasons, emotionally heavy hitting. So it's important to kind of make sure you're going with the right group. And it would probably be a heavy experience for children, young children, for instance, but also an amazing learning experience. It is very sensory immersive. So folks with sensory sensitivities might want to go prepared or just check out whether it's a good fit for them before they go, because you're walking through these rooms that are sort of simulating. It's not scary, but it's simulating sort of what a soldier would have experienced in different fronts in World War II. And part of the reason it's so cool is because it is so immersive and so visceral, but that's also it really, kind of hits you what everyone was going through during World War II. But it also has some lighter parts to it. There's a stage door canteen where they have sort of World War II era entertainment shows like the troops might have seen when they were abroad. And
oh,
I
cool.
love themed things. And so just having this like kind of hokey cafe there, I really love it. I would also say Audubon Zoo is one of my favorite places in the city. And that's uptown. And so it's a little harder to get to if you're staying downtown and you don't have a car, but the streetcar runs up St. Charles and is one way to get at least close. And then you could definitely use a ride share. And Audubon Zoo is just really thematic. It has an entire Louisiana area where you'll see animals from Louisiana. They play Zydeco music, they have local food, and it's just a really fun adventure. And they also have a little water park there if you happen to be there during warmer months.
Sounds like a great time.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm an adult, so I can't imagine if you have little kids, they would really love it, I think. I would highly recommend going on a cemetery tour or just exploring a cemetery on your own. Again, I'm a little into the macabre. So you asked me personally, and I definitely say cemetery. The tombs here are mostly above ground and lots of mausoleums and things like that. And they are extremely creepy, but also artistically beautiful. There's one very famous cemetery in the French Quarter that you can only access through a tour. And that has the famous voodoo priestess Marie Laveau is buried there. And you'll hear about her story if you go on that tour. And Nicolas Cage actually has a tomb in that cemetery as well. And it's like a pyramid.
Like the actor,
Yes.
Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, he's obviously not
is
in it
still
yet.
alive.
Yes. But he's so weird. And it's like this like Knights Templar-esque pyramid thing. I don't know. I don't want to get sued. But it's very
Oh my
interesting
God.
cemetery. In general,
It's the most Nicolas Cage thing I've ever heard.
you have to be a little careful. Some of the cemeteries are off the beaten track. And at least back in the day, they used to say that sometimes people would like kind of hide in them you wouldn't necessarily want to explore certain cemeteries by yourself. So I would recommend just either going to one sort of in the middle of things or taking one of these tours.
Very interesting.
And then for Frenchman Street Frenchman Street is sort of like the local version of Bourbon. And it's becoming more well-known now amongst tourists. So it's sort of getting a little bit more popular. But for a while, it was really this hidden gem. And it's where all the cool music is. And so Bourbon Street is sort of like the, I don't know. I don't want to say fake alternative to Frenchman, but it's like the highly touristy alternative to Frenchman, where a lot of our authentic music and performers actually hang out on Frenchman Street. And finally, my hidden gem attraction that I really love is this place called the Sazerac House. And you can walk to it from the French Quarter. The Sazerac is one of our famous cocktails. It was invented in New Orleans using Peychaud's bitters, which were originally started for medicinal reasons. So literally it was this medicine and it had like alcohol in the bitters, and people started just like realizing that it was like pretty awesome to just drop bitters and things and drink it. And like I recently had a friend come to town and I deliberately stacked the Pharmacy Museum followed by the Sazerac House so she could see the history of how New Orleans sort of like pharmaceutical scene just evolved into our cocktail scene. So the Sazerac House is a free cocktail museum. So I'm hoping that's
I like the sound of
piquing
that.
a lot of interest already. Not everyone knows that it's there. You just walk in and you give them your name and email and you get a little wristband and you get to go into this museum that is operated by, there's a bar called the Sazerac House and it's associated with that. And so they have a big gift store and I think, they sell a lot of alcohol and they get a lot of revenue that way. But the museum itself, you can just go in. It's 2 or 3 floors and each floor has like a history of a different liquor. So like there's a section on rum, there's a section on whiskey, and you get 3 complimentary tastes of cocktails while also learning how those cocktails came to be, like the Sazerac. So you learn about Peychaud's bitters and then you taste a Sazerac. And it's so much fun. They have all these interactive exhibits and it has free alcohol. So when I have guests come and visit me, it's almost, if they're, above 21 and enjoy cocktails, it's one of the first places I tend to bring them.
That's awesome. Is there an entry fee for that museum?
Nope.
The cocktail museum?
Nope, not at all.
Oh my gosh. So it truly is free.
Truly free.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And in today's world, it's like nothing's free anymore. So that's very cool.
I think honestly, it hypes you up so much about like, wow, there's so much rich history to all of these liquors that when you get to the gift store at the end, like they've told you what all the cool rare things are from different parts of the world. And I think that's how they're making it work out for themselves.
Clean out the gift shop. Yeah. Honestly, it's a good marketing plan there. Well, thank you for sharing all these wonderful things to do in New Orleans. And now I want to ask, where should someone stay for their very first time in the city?
I would say that for someone's first visit, they should definitely stay within walking distance of the French Quarter. So if they're an adult, especially, and are okay with a little bit of noise and busyness, they might want to stay right in the French Quarter. That'll be a little pricier. And there are a few other options that can situate you nicely within walking distance, but are just a little bit quieter. The CBD is right across from the French Quarter, definitely walking distance, and it's the main business district, like it stands for. And so during the day, you have a lot of professional folks wandering around there, and at night, it's just pretty quiet compared to the Quarter, but it's really just a short walk from the Quarter. The caveat is that walk does cross through some darker and less populated areas potentially. And so I would say it's important to, be aware of your surroundings and make a call of whether you're comfortable making that walk with a group or whether a ride share would be more appropriate. But either way, it's very, very geographically close to the quarter.
All good things to know. Is there an area where budget travelers should stay in New Orleans?
I would say so that I have a caveat here. This is actually my favorite neighborhood in New Orleans. So I would recommend anyone might want to stay here, but it's also particularly suited for budget travelers. And that's the Warehouse District, which is sort of an artsy, funky, repurposed industrial area in the city. It is technically walking distance from the quarter if you're willing to do the walk. It's a little bit more of a haul, and a lot of people probably would choose to use a ride share, or I don't really recommend renting a car for this area of the city because parking is so tough. But it's a bit of a walk. It can be done, but the neighborhood itself is really cool, really artsy, has some of the best restaurants in the entire city and at non-French Quarter prices. So the French Quarter really, not only is the food in general just not as great there, and that's saying a lot because New Orleans is famous for its food. I basically do not necessarily recommend folks eat in the French Quarter. I would recommend they go to the Warehouse District anyway because the food there is just all amazing. And there are fancy restaurants there for sure, but there are some more laid back restaurants. There's really everything, all at great quality. And our convention center is down there. And so there are a lot of chain hotels in that area that are really trying to be accessible for folks traveling for work or for conventions. And I think that can open some doors if you're looking for accommodations that are not really totally top tier or boutique small upscale places necessarily. You can find things like Hampton Inn right by the convention center.
Very cool. Yeah, you sold me just mentioning the food scene because for me, that's the most important part of a trip is eating good food. So that sounds fabulous in that area. Are there any other notable places to stay in New Orleans that you want to mention?
Uptown New Orleans is another really cool area. It's pretty separated from all the downtown neighborhoods, which would be the French Quarter, the CBD, the Warehouse District, are all more downtown. Uptown, like Uptown in most cities, is a little bit wealthier. It's an incredibly safe area. So walking around Uptown tends to be very comfortable for folks. There's a big thoroughfare there called Magazine Street, which has a bunch of shops, a bunch of restaurants, really cool to explore. And they have a lot of little bed and breakfast type areas in Uptown that are really cute. And so, for instance, if you're going on a little romantic getaway, Uptown might be the perfect fit for you. You'll also have quicker access to things like Audubon Park and Audubon Zoo. And the St. Charles streetcar line runs between Uptown and downtown. So even though it is pretty separated from the rest of the city, you have the option of hopping on that streetcar. And that's sort of an event in itself. St. Charles is one of our most famous roads that has these absolutely stunning kind of classic New Orleans mansions. They're absolutely gorgeous. Around the winter holidays, a lot of them are just impeccably decorated. They can also be very cool around Halloween, but really any time of year, it's just a stunning place to either wander or take that streetcar and just ogle as you take the streetcar into downtown. So it's another great option.
Very cool. Oh my gosh, Halloween in New Orleans sounds so cool. Of all the cities, I think that's where I'd want to go the most and at this time of recording, we're in October. I'm like, oh, I wish I could go in a few weeks for Halloween.
There's no shortage of things to do around Halloween. And I'll give one quick shout out. Even though our parades are mostly during Mardi Gras, we have one crew called the Crew of Boo. And it's a Halloween parade. So it's around Halloween time and it is like full blown. It's like a Mardi Gras parade, but it's just one isolated Halloween parade.
Oh, that's amazing. I love how you guys are so into parades.
We're into parades and we're into spooky things. And so the collision is like really pretty cool.
This is a perfect combo. Yeah. So you've talked about all these awesome places to stay, but on the flip side, are there any places that visitors should avoid when visiting New Orleans?
New Orleans definitely has a reputation of having some crime issues, and I would say that that is not an unfounded reputation entirely. So I would just in general recommend visitors stick to kind of those major neighborhoods that we've already talked about, like the French Quarter, the CBD, the Warehouse District, Uptown. You can also check out my guide on neighborhoods to learn about a few more lesser known ones. And I would just recommend using caution if you were, for instance, renting an Airbnb that was somewhere on the outskirts of any of those neighborhoods or sort of in between those neighborhoods. Potentially look at a crime map and see where you would be staying and walking. Midtown can be a really affordable neighborhood for things like Airbnbs, and Midtown in general during the day has plenty of safe areas, but it's also a little bit patchwork in terms of the crime map. And so I would really recommend that visitors just do a little research and check out the location they'd be staying first.
All good to know. And that's a good segue into safety in New Orleans. Would you say that New Orleans is safe?
So in terms of safety, like a lot of major cities, it's really important in New Orleans to just be aware of your surroundings. Like I said, check a crime map before you choose where to stay. I think the South in general, there are a lot of guns around. We sometimes have shootings. Sometimes even there have been a lot of carjackings lately. There are certain areas where you might be concerned about something like a mugging if you were walking alone at night. And so I definitely would want any visitor to be cautious about just knowing where they're going, knowing what the plan is, walking in a group or using a rideshare. In most places that are outside really those very populated centers of neighborhoods, like if you're in the middle of the French Quarter, you're mostly going to be fine. And when the sun sets, I think the French Quarter has a lot of tourists and people know that and can be a bit opportunistic about things, pickpocketing or just trying to dupe you into things. So it's a lot of petty crime in the French Quarter, but you just want to be aware of that and keep a close eye on your belongings. And like I said, it can make sense to stay in areas like the CBD or the Warehouse District, especially to save a little money. I personally do walk between the CBD and the Quarter or the Warehouse District and the Quarter with a group. As long as that, I might not do it with just me and one other, petite woman. But if I have really a group of friends with me, we'll all do it. And it's not something I'm overly concerned about generally, though, again, I stay very aware. I do things like try not to look down at my phone so that I don't look like I'm maybe lost or not in control of what I'm doing. I try to radiate confidence, and I do often carry pepper spray when I'm walking around a lot of the areas of the city. So I think it makes sense to exercise caution, but is absolutely not a reason I would ever advise someone to not visit New Orleans, because all of our major tourist areas are very safe during the day and at night, just like any other city, are reasonably safe with these common sense precautions.
Right, which I think really is true of most any big city, especially in the United States. So I appreciate your honest insight there. So moving right along, we've talked about this a little bit when we've discussed some seasonal activities to do in the city. But what is the best time of year to visit New Orleans?
I would say there's no one best time of year, but there are several top contenders. One would be Mardi Gras, if that's what you're trying to go for. If you do go during Mardi Gras, that might take over a lot of your visit and take up a lot of your energy and sort of planning and time resources. So I would say Mardi Gras is great if you try to do a Mardi Gras trip.
And what is the time of year again for that?
It starts January 6th and it runs until Lent starts, which changes slightly. It's usually like very early spring, late winter, like depending on when Easter is that year, it scales to that. If you are more interested in just sort of seeing New Orleans and are willing to miss Mardi Gras, the spring always has fantastic weather. And the time around Halloween, as we talked about, is really special in New Orleans because it's a spooky city. And so if you like spooky things, it's amazing to go to the spooky city in a spooky time, and you will have a lot of fun. And then finally, the winter holidays are also really fun in New Orleans because, especially I think I grew up in Connecticut where there's snow, and there is not really snow in New Orleans, obviously. And it's sort of fun to see what they do. This is a little bit of my wry observational Yankee coming out here, but it's a little fun to see them make winter in a place that doesn't feel like winter, though occasionally it feels like winter down here. But there's this little side street called Fulton Alley, and they make fake snow in Fulton Alley, which is really cool. They light up
Cute.
City Park, like I mentioned, with Christmas lights. And one of the coolest things about the winter holidays is that there's a tradition that dates back really far of having special Christmas time dinners that are like prefix dinners that the restaurants usually have at a reasonable price. And so New Orleans is a huge foodie city, and we have some really famous but very fancy restaurants here that are all amazing. But for instance, I definitely can't go to those restaurants very often in my life. But in December, they will offer these prefix meals that, like, I need to budget for one if I want to go, for sure, but it's a more reasonable way to really get the full experience of the restaurant. And also, it's just really special because they often have different things on their menu than they'd normally serve, and it can be just a really cool memory. The one thing to keep in mind is that you might want to avoid planning a trip during hurricane season because you don't know when a hurricane is going to come, and if a hurricane comes, everything is chaos. Like, we often have to evacuate, and so I would not want to be a visitor in the New Orleans area when New Orleans has to evacuate for a hurricane. And then flights get canceled, so you could get stuck down here, or you might just not make it down here in the first place, depending on the timing. So I would just avoid the logistics. Hurricane season is May through October, and so I would avoid that. And that also coincides with when it is really, really hot here. Swelteringly, oppressively hot. And even if you feel like you're okay with heat, unless you're from a similarly hot and humid climate, I think people can be really caught off guard by how, like, it really kills the mood when it's oppressively hot here and you're trying to sightsee. So I would just avoid the summer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, very good thing to note, especially if you're someone who doesn't live somewhere where hurricanes exist, because it's not really something that you would think of. So very important thing to note. Just really fast, how much time do you recommend spending in New Orleans just for maybe your first visit to the city?
I'd say if you're trying to see the whole city, maybe 5 days. And if you're really sticking to just the French Quarter, 3 is probably sufficient.
And you can always do multiple visits. I think New Orleans is for sure worthy of multiple visits.
Absolutely.
So we talked about this briefly as well, but what are the best ways to navigate the city?
In general, if you're staying in the French Quarter, the CBD, or the Warehouse District, you can somewhat walk between all of those. And there are also city bikes you can rent, like the blue bikes. You should be very careful when you're riding a bike around these areas because they're not all built for cyclists, despite the fact that bikes are available to rent. So I would just have your wits about you if you do that. And then ride shares are very easy to get in that area. I'm really in the whole city. You can easily call a Lyft or an Uber. And if you are staying in Uptown or you want to go see Uptown, there is a streetcar, which is like a trolley that runs between downtown and Uptown. So you can get between, you can see St. Charles that way. And there's also a streetcar that runs to the cemetery. And the line literally says cemeteries. And so that is another way, to potentially see cemeteries that you can also find those right in the quarter as well.
Very cool. So now my favorite section of the podcast is talking about food. And like you said, New Orleans is a huge foodie place with some very unique dishes local to the city. So if you could tell us a little bit about some of the must-try foods in New Orleans.
Sure. So New Orleans really has its own cuisine, almost like you're going to another country. And when I have visitors, I really buckle down because I have to usually walk them through a menu the first couple times we go out to eat. Some of the old standbys that people have probably heard of and might want to try themselves are jambalaya, which is like a slightly spicy rice dish with usually sausage and chicken, so meat and rice basically. It's a pretty safe jumping in point, I'd say, even for slightly picky eaters, because can be a little spicy, but it's pretty familiar.
It's very simple, but it's very good.
Yeah, I think if you have maybe kids and they're not the most adventurous, but they might want to try something local, jambalaya is a great place to start them. My favorite local food is gumbo, which is a type of soup that you can buy it year round, but most of us here would only eat it in the winter. It's really a cooler weather dish. And it's made with a roux, which is like a dark broth made with flour, almost like a thin gravy. And you can either get a seafood gumbo or like a chicken and sausage gumbo usually. Both are very good. Crawfish étouffée is a dish with crawfish. We eat a lot of crawfish down here. I know not everyone has probably tried crawfish. They taste a little like maybe little lobsters almost. They're a little fishier than lobster, sort of shrimp-like a little bit. I love crawfish. I would definitely, if you're a seafood eater, give crawfish a try. And crawfish étouffée is crawfish tail meat in usually like rice and a tomato-ish gravy. Also, in my opinion, if you're a seafood eater, a pretty safe place to jump in, get a little bit more adventurous with local cuisine. Po' boys are what we call our like sandwiches. Like growing up in Connecticut, we called them grinders. Obviously, a lot of people call them subs, subways, whatever. We call them po' boys down here, which is short for boy, which is that like evolution of the word. And it would be very common to get like a fried shrimp po' boy. You could even get a fried green tomato po' boy in a lot of places. But maybe one of the most decadent you can find in different places, something they'd call like a debris po' boy, which has shredded beef, like roast beef, and a thick gravy, and sometimes you dip it in an au jus sauce. And then we've talked about beignets. Highly recommend everyone tried beignets and cafe au lait as a treat. And I'll throw in at the end, if you are feeling brave, we do eat alligator down here. You can get fried alligator or you can get blackened alligator. I am a fan of blackened alligator myself. It's a little chewy, but it is pretty innocuous tasting. And I think it's fun to just say that you tried alligator. It's not something you can do in a lot of other places in the country.
Yeah, I tried alligator fritters when I was there for the first time at 13, which to me was very adventurous at 13.
What did you think?
And they were delicious. I was so surprised by how much I liked it. It didn't taste like anything that I hadn't tried before. You know, it kind of tasted like chicken almost, but it was a little richer, I think. It was delicious.
And a little chewier.
Yeah, but the flavor was great and came with like this dipping sauce and it was delicious. I haven't had them since, but I would try them again.
I'll also throw in New Orleans is a huge festival city, and sometimes we have food festivals. And those will knock your socks off. So like there's a po' boy festival, there's a gumbo festival. If you happen to be in town and there's any kind of food festival going on, I would say don't overthink it, just show up and eat all the food you can.
I love it. Sounds like my dream come true. So moving right along to one of my final questions for you as we come to the end of the episode. Is there any etiquette visitors should know when visiting New Orleans?
If you're not from the South, I think there is a particular etiquette that applies to a lot of the Southern U.S. that is a little different from what I grew up with in the Northeast part of the country. So, for instance, we use sir and ma'am here quite a bit. It's very standard. Whereas where I grew up, that could almost be seen as offensive because it was sort of like calling someone old. If you said, yes, ma'am, they would sometimes get offended. Down here,
I still get that. I get that all the time because when I'm at work, I call people ma'am and they'll be like, did you just call me ma'am? And I'm like, I don't know why. I just feel like it's the polite thing to do.
I do not do a very good job code switching between the South and the North. And I accidentally ma'am and sir people when I go up North now. And I deal with that a lot. Like it's a bad mistake to make in either direction, honestly. But to put it in perspective, like growing up, if an adult asked me if I wanted something and I said yes, my mother would say, yes, what? And the answer was, yes, please. Down here, if a kid makes that same mistake and the parent says, yes, what? The answer is usually, yes, ma'am. And so that's how culturally relevant ma'am and sir is. It can even take the place of please.
Interesting. I like that. That's a good way to put it, to remember.
And then similarly, there's a little bit of a convention down south where we often call people by their first name, but with Miss or Mr. in front of it. So especially if someone's doing you a favor or maybe is a waitress at the restaurant you're at or something like that. And let's say they have a name tag and it says Betty, you might choose to address them as Miss Betty as a way of being polite.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really endearing.
It's very endearing.
Yeah.
I love it.
Like most of the US, tipping is common down here at restaurants and hotels and things like that. Something that is Mardi Gras specific, people take their spots on the parade route very seriously and work very hard to get their spots on the parade route. Some people camp out all day to be right up front by the road. Some people will literally bring their young children and a box of board games and a blanket, and they will come 6 hours early to claim their spot. So it is definitely rude to then show up right before the parade and stand in front of them. And sometimes this can really also escalate the situation because, again, people take it very seriously.
So a fight's going to break out.
Yeah. If you are not in the French Quarter in sort of those like debaucherous parades, and you like, if you've gone to a family friendly parade, stay family friendly, basically, is the expectation. Despite, again, the sort of association with Mardi Gras. If you are in a place with a bunch of families, that's not the time to actually get as crazy as you may be thinking you want to get. And then another Mardi Gras specific thing. Occasionally, someone on a float will make it very clear who they're trying to throw something to. Like they might point to a person, they might make very deliberate eye contact with a person and then throw something for that person. And because the float is moving and people are imperfect, you might get whacked in the head or something with the thing that was intended for the kid next to you. And it is sort of a etiquette thing that you would then hand that over to the person it was intended for. It's just a very nice thing to do. And if it wasn't meant for you, don't keep it. If it's not clear who it was meant for, the person who catches it gets it. And if it falls on the ground and it wasn't clearly meant for someone and you pick it up, then it's yours. But don't steal things that are clearly not meant for you, especially those really coveted throws like we talked about earlier.
So I can't like snag a teddy bear out of the sky in front of a child and just peace
You
out.
can. How do you think I got my chicken hat? Just kidding.
The fight to the death for the chicken hat.
And finally, the last thing I'll bring up in terms of, I don't know if this is really etiquette, but it's just a good thing to know. We have two different distinct ethnic and cultural groups down here in Louisiana, Cajun and Creole. And I think people who maybe aren't as familiar with the region often use these interchangeably, but they're actually completely distinct racial and cultural groups. The Cajun people came from Acadiana in Canada, were exiled for religious reasons, and so Acadian became Cajun. They speak Cajun French, and they mostly live on the southwestern side of the state, closer to the city of Lafayette. So there is some Cajun influence in New Orleans, but actually most of the more urban groups, or the folks who settled in these urban areas like New Orleans, tend to be Creole, which are descendants of often a mixture of European, African-American, and maybe Native American. So it's really like a blended cultural influence group. And that's how it's gotten so distinctive and so interesting and cool. So the language is different and the foods are different. There's a lot of overlap where like both Cajuns and Creoles have forms of certain dishes, like gumbo, for instance, but they might use slightly different ingredients based on where the groups came from and what these influences are. And Creole language has a little bit of French influence, but not as much of the heavy French. Like Cajun French is mostly French, whereas Creole has really a mix of different language influences in it. So I think it's just important to know that these two different groups exist and sort of jump in, get to know all the cultures, but know what you're getting to know.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you make that distinction and that people know the difference but before they visit New Orleans. So thank you for explaining that. Do you have any other specific tips that you want to give our listeners before we wrap up the episode?
I think I've hit on a lot of my tips already, so I'll just remind folks to really take the heat seriously and prepare for it by packing things like hats or cooling rags and making sure you have planned breaks in the AC if you're going during the hotter months. Remember that you can walk down the street with your alcoholic beverages here. It's a really fun thing to do. If you are coming to New Orleans, like I just explained about sort of the rich cultural tradition down here, a fun way to get to know things before you come, especially if you're coming for Mardi Gras, look up Mardi Gras songs on something like Spotify. We have a whole lot of traditional songs. The most famous would be like Iko Iko is a song a lot of people know. And by listening to these songs, you'll really get to know the culture ahead of time, and you'll be able to catch certain cultural references. Like we have a beer called Giacomo, and if you listen to Iko Iko, you will figure out how Giacomo got named after that song.
Very cool.
And finally, if someone in a bar bets you that they can tell you where you got your shoes, don't fall for it. The answer is going to be on your feet.
Oh my God. Is that really a thing
It's a
there?
thing.
So you'll like put down money on
Yes.
this and they'll say that and they get
It's
the
people
money.
prowling Bourbon Street knowing people are too drunk to have any sense, and a lot of people get. And then people
genius.
sometimes actually get really, really angry if you don't pay up. So just
That is
don't
hilarious.
engage.
Oh my God, that's very good to know because I would 100% fall for that. So to wrap up, what is the ultimate reason people should visit New Orleans?
I think there's nowhere else in the United States that's quite like New Orleans. Like, it really makes you feel like you've been transported to another time and another place. Has its own food, its own music, its own language, its own traditions and stories. And there's no substitute for that. You can only get that in New Orleans. So you should come and see it for yourself.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. Remember to go to travellemming.com to read all about the topics discussed today. Just type in New Orleans in the search bar to access all of Meg's writing. If you have any questions or want to share an idea, drop us a comment below. We would love to hear from you after the episode. Also, we host Travel Lemming meetups all around the US and Vancouver, so check out our homepage to see if we're in a city near you. You can meet one of the members of our team and share travel stories over a beer. Again, if you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and give us that 5-star rating so you can listen to every new episode of the Travel Lemming podcast. We post on Thursdays. Meg, thank you so much for being here today. I loved recording with you today, and thank you for sharing your New Orleans expertise with me and all of our listeners today. It was such a pleasure getting to know the city through you.
Thank you so much, Betty. I really enjoyed this too, and I hope it gets people to come out and see the special city.
Absolutely. I'm ready to go and have some beignets by the river. Well, bye, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Travel Lemming podcast.